It was supposed to be a normal Tuesday evening, the kind where you relax after a long day and maybe watch some TV. But that night turned into something I'll never forget. My husband, David, had been feeling unwell all day. He kept saying it was just stress from work, but I could tell something wasn't right. He looked pale, tired, and his breathing seemed heavier than usual. I tried to convince him to go to the hospital, but he brushed me off with a smile. "I'll be fine," he said. That phrase keeps replaying in my mind now, like a broken record. By 8 p.m., things took a turn for the worse. I was in the kitchen cleaning up when I heard a loud thud. I ran to see what happened, and there he was, David, lying on the floor, clutching his chest, gasping for air. My heart stopped. I dropped everything and grabbed my phone, dialing 911 as fast as I could. My hands were shaking so much I could barely press the numbers. When the operator answered, I screamed, "Please hurry. My husband isn't breathing." The wait felt like forever, but in reality, it was only a few minutes before the flashing lights of an ambulance lit up our quiet suburban street. The paramedics jumped out, their faces serious and focused. They moved quickly, carrying their equipment toward our driveway. But just as they reached the curb, someone stepped in front of them. It was Mrs. Hargrove, the president of our homeowners association, HOA. She stood there with her arms crossed, blocking their way. "You can't park here," she said sharply, pointing to the curb where the ambulance had stopped. "This is a no parking zone." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Was she really stopping them over a parking rule? I ran outside, yelling at the top of my lungs, "Are you serious right now? My husband is inside dying." But Mrs. Hargrove didn't budge. Her expression stayed calm, almost icy. "Rules are rules," she said firmly. "If you'd followed proper protocol and notified us about your emergency, we might have made accommodations. Accommodations for an ambulance, while my husband lay unconscious inside." I wanted to scream, to push past her and drag the paramedics and myself, but I was frozen in shock. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be real. The paramedics tried reasoning with her, explaining how critical every second was in situations like this. They told her that moving the ambulance would waste precious time. But Mrs. Hargrove wouldn't listen. She insisted they follow the HOA guidelines, even if it meant parking 2 blocks away and running back with their gear. Every moment, they argued, felt like hours. Finally, they gave in and moved the ambulance, rushing back to the house as fast as they could. When they finally got to David, it was too late. His heart had stopped, and despite their best efforts, they couldn't bring him back. As they covered his body with a sheet, I fell to my knees, sobbing uncontrollably. My world shattered in that instant. How could this happen? How could anyone put rules above a human life? Neighbors started coming out of their houses, drawn by the commotion. Some looked horrified, while others avoided eye contact altogether. One brave person asked Mrs. Hargrove why she hadn't let the paramedics through sooner. Her response sent chills down everyone's spine. I was enforcing the covenants. What else was I supposed to do? That line stuck with me. Rules. Covenants. Those pieces of paper, the same ones that dictated mailbox colors and lawn lengths, had cost me the love of my life. And as I sat there, holding David's hand one last time, I realized this wasn't just about him or me anymore. It was about something bigger, something darker, something that needed to change, no matter what it took. The standoff between Mrs. Hargrove and the paramedics lasted only 5 minutes, but those 5 minutes felt like an eternity. Every second ticked by with excruciating slowness, each one carrying the weight of a life hanging in the balance. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, watching as the paramedics pleaded with her, explaining how critical it was to act immediately. "Every moment counts," one of them said, his voice urgent but calm. "We need to get to him now." But Mrs. Hargrove didn't budge. She stood there, arms still crossed, her face unreadable. It was as if she had built a wall around herself, a fortress of rules and regulations that no amount of reasoning could penetrate. "You know the guidelines," she said firmly, her tone almost mechanical. "If you don't comply, I'll have no choice but to report this." Report what? An ambulance trying to save a life. The absurdity of it all made my head spin. I wanted to scream, to grab her by the shoulders, and shake some sense into her. But I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were rooted to the ground, my voice trapped somewhere deep inside me. All I could do was watch helplessly as precious time slipped away. Finally, after what felt like forever, the paramedics relented. They moved the ambulance to a designated parking area 2 blocks away, just as Mrs. Hargrove demanded. Then they sprinted back with their equipment, their faces red with exertion and frustration. By the time they reached David, he was already gone. His heart had stopped, and despite their desperate attempts to revive him, nothing worked. As they covered his body with a sheet, I collapsed to my knees, sobbing uncontrollably. My chest felt hollow, like someone had ripped out everything inside me. Neighbors began gathering around, drawn by the flashing lights and commotion. Some looked horrified, whispering among themselves. Others stared at Mrs. Hargrove, their expressions a mix of anger and disbelief. One man stepped forward and asked her point-blank, "Why didn't you let them through sooner?" Her response sent shockwaves through the crowd. "I was enforcing the covenants," she said without hesitation, her voice cold and detached. What else was I supposed to do? That line, "enforcing the covenants," echoed in my mind long after she walked away. How could anyone prioritize rules over human life, over my husband's life? I replayed the scene over and over in my head, searching for answers, for something that would make sense of what had happened. But there was none. Just the harsh reality that David was gone because of a rule about where an ambulance could park. In the days that followed, grief consumed me. Every corner of the house reminded me of him. The chair he always sat in while reading the newspaper, the coffee mug he left on the counter that night, the sound of his laughter that used to fill the room. Sleep became impossible. Instead, nightmares haunted me. In them, I saw Mrs. Hargrove standing over David's body, reciting HOA guidelines like some twisted mantra. Her words echoed louder and louder until I woke up gasping for air. Word spread quickly through Willow Creek about what had happened. At first, people whispered behind closed doors, unsure of what to say or do. Then the whispers turned into conversations, and soon the entire neighborhood was buzzing. Some neighbors came to offer condolences, their eyes filled with sympathy. Others avoided me altogether, maybe out of guilt or fear of saying the wrong thing. But one thing was clear: no one could ignore what had happened. Mrs. Hargrove, however, remained unapologetic. When confronted by angry residents demanding answers, she defended her actions with the same rigid logic she'd shown that night. He might not have survived anyway, she told one woman who accused her of being heartless. I was simply doing my job. Her lack of remorse only fueled the growing outrage. Flyers started appearing around the neighborhood, calling for her resignation from the HOA board. Some even suggested legal action. For the first time since moving to Willow Creek, I realized I wasn't alone in my anger. Other neighbors shared my frustration, and together, we began to question whether Mrs. Hargrove's obsession with rules had gone too far. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself torn between grief and determination. Grief for the loss of David, and determination to ensure that no one else would ever suffer because of such senseless rigidity. Something had to change, not just for me, but for everyone in Willow Creek. The days following David's death were a blur of emotions: grief, anger, disbelief, all swirling together in a storm I couldn't escape. Everywhere I turned, reminders of him lingered. His favorite book resting on the coffee table, the empty space at the dinner table where he used to sit, the faint scent of his cologne still lingering in the hallway. It was like living in a house haunted by memories, each one more painful than the last. But outside those walls, something else was brewing, something that gave me a flicker of hope amidst the darkness. Word about what had happened spread quickly through Willow Creek. At first, people whispered cautiously behind closed doors, unsure of how to react. Some blamed Mrs. Hargrove outright, calling her actions heartless and cruel. Others hesitated, torn between their loyalty to the HOA and their growing unease about what they'd heard. But as the truth came out, about the paramedics being blocked, about David's life slipping away because of a parking rule, the tide began to shift. Neighbors who had once feared crossing Mrs. Hargrove started speaking up. One afternoon, while I was sitting on my porch trying to distract myself with a cup of tea, a man named Mr. Peterson approached me. He lived 2 streets over and had always struck me as quiet and reserved, someone who stayed out of trouble. But now his face was red with frustration, his hands clenched into fists. "This is unacceptable," he said, pacing back and forth. "What happened to your husband shouldn't have happened to anyone. That woman has gone too far." I nodded, tears welling up in my eyes. "I just don't understand how she could think rules matter more than a person's life," I replied softly. Mr. Peterson shook his head. "She doesn't think. She just follows the covenants blindly, like they're some kind of holy scripture. But this time, she crossed a line, one nobody should ever cross." His words resonated with others, and soon, whispers turned into action. Flyers began appearing around the neighborhood, urging residents to demand accountability from the HOA. Some called for Mrs. Hargrove's resignation. Others suggested revising the covenants altogether. A group of neighbors even organized a meeting at the community center to discuss what had happened and figure out how to prevent it from happening again. When the night of the meeting arrived, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go. The thought of facing Mrs. Hargrove made my stomach churn, and reliving that terrible night felt unbearable. But deep down, I knew I had to be there, for David, for myself, and for everyone else who deserved better. The room buzzed with tension as dozens of residents packed inside. People spoke passionately, sharing stories of their own frustrations with the HOA. One woman recounted how Mrs. Hargrove had fined her for planting flowers that weren't on the approved list. Another man described how he'd been forced to repaint his front door because it didn't match the community aesthetic. Each story added fuel to the fire, turning simmering resentment into outright rebellion. Mrs. Hargrove sat quietly in the corner, her usual air of authority replaced by unease. When someone finally addressed her directly, asking why she hadn't let the paramedics save David, her response was defensive. "I was following procedure," she insisted, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. "You can't expect me to make exceptions every time someone breaks the rules." Her words sparked outrage. Voices rose, arguments erupted, and for a moment, it seemed like the meeting might spiral out of control. But then an older woman stood up, her presence commanding immediate silence. "This isn't about exceptions," she said firmly. "It's about humanity. Rules exist to serve us, not the other way around. What you did wasn't just wrong, it was inhumane." The room erupted in agreement, and for the first time, I saw cracks forming in Mrs. Hargrove's armor. Her face flushed, and she avoided eye contact with anyone. It was clear that her grip on the neighborhood was slipping, and for the first time since moving to Willow Creek, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could take back our community and ensure that no one else would suffer because of blind adherence to meaningless rules. The momentum from the community meeting didn't stop there. It only grew stronger. What started as a wave of outrage turned into a full-blown movement, one that spread like wildfire through Willow Creek. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves now gathered regularly, united by a shared determination to hold Mrs. Hargrove accountable and rewrite the rules that had controlled their lives for so long. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone in my grief or in my anger. One morning, a knock at the door startled me out of my thoughts. Standing on the porch was Detective Alvarez, a tall man with kind eyes and a calm demeanor. His presence immediately made me nervous. Was he here about David? About what happened that night? My heart raced as I invited him inside. "Mrs. Carter," he began gently, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, "we're investigating the circumstances surrounding your husband's death. There are some details we need to clarify. particularly regarding the actions of the HOA president. His words caught me off guard. An investigation. I hadn't expected this, not because I didn't think it was deserved, but because I assumed nothing would come of it. People like Mrs. Hargrove always seemed untouchable, protected by layers of bureaucracy and power. But as Detective Alvarez explained, evidence suggested her actions might have gone beyond negligence. They could be criminal. He told me about a neighbor's Ring doorbell camera that had captured everything. Mrs. Hargrove blocking the paramedics, her refusal to let them through despite their pleas, even the exact moment they gave up arguing and moved the ambulance. The footage painted a chilling picture of someone willing to prioritize rules over human life. As Detective Alvarez spoke, I felt a mix of emotions, relief that someone was finally taking this seriously, but also fear. Fear that the system might still fail us, that justice wouldn't come. Still, I agreed to cooperate fully, sharing every detail I remembered from that night. By the time he left, I felt drained but hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, something good could come out of all this pain. Meanwhile, tensions in the neighborhood continued to rise. Flyers criticizing Mrs. Hargrove appeared almost daily, taped to mailboxes and lampposts. Some called for her resignation. Others demanded legal action. Even local news outlets picked up the story, dubbing her the HOA enforcer and sparking debates online about the balance between rules and compassion. At first, Mrs. Hargrove tried to defend herself publicly, insisting she had simply been doing her job. During a tense interview with a reporter, she said, "If we start making exceptions for emergencies, where does it end? We can't let emotions override the covenants." Her words only fueled more backlash, with people accusing her of being cold-hearted and out of touch. But as the pressure mounted, cracks began to show in her carefully constructed facade. She stopped attending HOA meetings, claiming she needed time to reflect. Her usual confident stride turned hesitant, her sharp tone replaced by awkward silences whenever neighbors confronted her. It was as if the weight of what she'd done, and the growing condemnation from those around her, was finally sinking in. For me, watching her unravel was bittersweet. Part of me wanted her to feel the same pain I felt every day. The emptiness, the regret, the knowledge that you couldn't undo what had been done. But another part of me hoped she'd realize the damage she'd caused and take responsibility for it. Not just for David, but for everyone in Willow Creek. As weeks turned into months, the neighborhood transformed. People who had once feared speaking out now openly criticized the HOA's rigid policies. A petition circulated calling for reforms, including clearer guidelines for emergencies and limits on the board's authority. Slowly but surely, the community began to reclaim its voice, one that prioritized kindness and common sense over blind obedience to outdated rules. Still, I knew the fight wasn't over. Justice for David meant more than just holding Mrs. Hargrove accountable. It meant ensuring that no one else would ever suffer because of such senseless rigidity. And while the road ahead seemed uncertain, I held on to hope. Hope that change was possible. Hope that David's memory would inspire something better. And hope that together, we could build a community rooted in humanity rather than control. The trial began 6 months after David's death, and it felt like the entire town of Willow Creek had come to watch. The courtroom was packed, with reporters scribbling notes in the back and neighbors sitting stiffly in the rows. Some came out of curiosity, others out of anger or sorrow, but everyone shared one thing: a need to see justice served. I sat in the front row, my hands trembling as I clutched a tissue, trying to steady myself for what was about to unfold. Mrs. Hargrove looked different from the last time I'd seen her. Gone was the confident woman who ruled the HOA with an iron fist. In her place was someone smaller, more fragile, someone who seemed to shrink under the weight of all the eyes on her. She sat beside her lawyer, fidgeting with her hands and avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. It was strange to see her this way, almost vulnerable. But no matter how much she might have changed, I couldn't forget what she had done. The prosecution opened the case by laying out the facts plainly. They described how Mrs. Hargrove had blocked paramedics from entering my home, delaying treatment that could have saved David's life. They played the Ring doorbell footage, showing her standing firm even as the paramedics pleaded with her. Her voice echoed through the courtroom, cold and unyielding. "You'll have to relocate the vehicle. These are the covenants." The room fell silent as the video ended. You could feel the collective shock ripple through the crowd. Even the judge leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable. The prosecutor then argued that Mrs. Hargrove's actions weren't just negligent, they were reckless and showed a complete disregard for human life. "She chose rules over compassion," he said, his voice rising. "And because of that choice, a man lost his life." The defense tried to counter this narrative, painting Mrs. Hargrove as someone who was simply doing her duty. Her lawyer insisted she wasn't responsible for David's death, claiming his underlying health issues were the true cause. Even if the ambulance had arrived sooner, there's no guarantee he would have survived. The lawyer argued. He called expert witnesses to testify about the unpredictability of heart attacks and the slim chances of survival in cases like David's. But the prosecution wasn't swayed. They'd brought in medical professionals who explained how critical every second is during a cardiac emergency. One doctor testified that even a few minutes' delay can drastically reduce the odds of survival. Another witness recounted how frustrated the paramedics had been that night, describing their desperation to reach David as quickly as possible. Each piece of evidence chipped away at the defense's argument, leaving little room for doubt about the role Mrs. Hargrove had played. As the days dragged on, more witnesses took the stand. Neighbors, friends, even former members of the HOA board. Some spoke about Mrs. Hargrove's obsession with rules, sharing stories of fines issued for minor infractions or harsh penalties handed down for breaking guidelines. Others talked about the fear she instilled in the community, the way she silenced dissent with threats of legal action or retaliation. Slowly, a portrait emerged of someone who valued control above all else, even above basic humanity. One particularly damning moment came when Detective Alvarez testified. He described the investigation into David's death, explaining how the evidence pointed to Mrs. Hargrove's deliberate obstruction. When asked why she hadn't let the paramedics through, he paused before answering. "From everything we've gathered," he said, "it appears she prioritized enforcing the covenants over saving a life." Those words hung heavy in the air, silencing any murmurs in the room. For the first time, I saw Mrs. Hargrove flinch, her face pale as she stared down at her lap. It was clear she knew the tide was turning against her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. By the end of the trial, the atmosphere in the courtroom was tense, charged with anticipation. Everyone waited anxiously for the jury's verdict, their eyes darting between Mrs. Hargrove and the foreman who would deliver the final decision. As I sat there, gripping the edge of my seat, I realized something important. This wasn't just about me or David anymore. It was about holding someone accountable for putting rules above lives, and sending a message that such actions would never be tolerated again. The courtroom was eerily quiet as the jury filed back in, their faces unreadable. Every eye in the room followed them, searching for any hint of what they might say. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. This was it, the moment we'd all been waiting for. The foreman stood up, holding a slip of paper that felt heavier than anything I'd ever known. He cleared his throat and read the verdict. Guilty of involuntary manslaughter. A wave of gasps rippled through the room. Some people clapped softly, while others sat in stunned silence. Mrs. Hargrove's lawyer whispered something to her, but she didn't react. She just stared straight ahead, her face pale and blank, as if she couldn't believe what had happened. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered David lying on the floor that night, gasping for air, and the sympathy vanished. The judge wasted no time delivering the sentence. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said sternly, looking down at her over his glasses, "your actions demonstrated a reckless disregard for human life. You've allowed rigid adherence to rules to override basic compassion and common sense. For this, you will serve 5 years in prison. 5 years. It wasn't enough to bring David back, but it was something. A small measure of justice for what she had done. As the bailiff led her away, I watched her walk out of the courtroom, her head bowed. She looked smaller now, not like the towering figure who once ruled Willow Creek with an iron grip. It was hard to reconcile this broken woman with the one who had blocked paramedics from saving my husband's life. In the days that followed, the neighborhood began to heal, or at least try to. People who had kept their distance during the trial started reaching out, offering condolences and apologies for not speaking up sooner. Neighbors brought casseroles and handwritten notes, little gestures that reminded me I wasn't alone. Even Sarah, who lived next door, came by with tears in her eyes. I should have done more, she admitted, hugging me tightly. We all should have. But the changes went beyond kind words and shared meals. The HOA underwent a complete overhaul. Mrs. Hargrove's resignation created a power vacuum, and a group of neighbors stepped forward to form a new board. These were people who genuinely cared about the community, not just enforcing rules, but fostering connection and understanding. They rewrote the covenants, stripping away the unnecessary restrictions and adding clear guidelines for emergencies. No longer would anyone suffer because of arbitrary policies or unchecked authority. Still, despite these positive changes, living in the house where David had died felt impossible. Everywhere I turned, memories of him lingered. The laughter we used to share in the living room, the quiet moments sipping coffee on the porch, it all felt too painful to bear. One day, while sorting through David's belongings, I found a note he had written months before his death. It was simple, just a few lines scrawled on the back of an envelope. Life is short. Don't waste it being afraid to start over. Those words stayed with me, echoing in my mind long after I packed the note away. Maybe it was time to take David's advice, to leave behind the place that held so much pain and begin again somewhere new. With Mark's support, I made the difficult decision to sell the house. It wasn't easy letting go of the home we had built together, but staying there felt like clinging to grief instead of moving toward hope. As we prepared to move, I noticed subtle shifts within myself. The anger that had consumed me for so long began to soften, replaced by a determination to honor David's memory in a meaningful way. I started volunteering at a local advocacy group, helping families navigate similar battles against bureaucracy and injustice. In doing so, I found purpose, a way to channel my pain into something productive. Willow Creek changed too. Without Mrs. Hargrove's shadow looming over everything, the neighborhood felt lighter, freer. People smiled more, waved to each other across yards, and organized block parties to reconnect. Slowly but surely, the fear that had gripped the community dissolved, replaced by a renewed sense of unity and trust. Looking back, I realized the trial hadn't just been about holding Mrs. Hargrove accountable. It had been about reclaiming our humanity, about choosing kindness over control, empathy over enforcement. And though David was gone, his legacy lived on in the lessons we learned and the changes we fought for. Life would never be the same without him, but maybe, just maybe, it could still be good. It's been 2 years since the trial, and though the pain of losing David still lingers, I've learned to carry it differently. Grief doesn't fade completely. It transforms. Some days, it's a dull ache in the back of my mind, a quiet reminder of what I lost. Other days, it feels fresh and raw, like it did that night when everything changed forever. But even on those hard days, I try to focus on the good. The lessons David's death taught me, the changes it sparked in our community, and the hope that tragedies like mine can inspire others to do better. Mrs. Hargrove served 3 years of her 5-year sentence before being released on parole. Rumor has it she lives alone now, shunned by most of Willow Creek. Occasionally, I hear whispers about her, how she spends her days tending to a small garden or walking along empty streets late at night. Part of me feels sorry for her. She seems so isolated, so consumed by regret. But another part of me knows she brought this loneliness upon herself. Her obsession with rules cost her everything, her reputation, her relationships, and ultimately, her freedom. After selling the house, Mark and I moved to a quieter town about an hour away. It's smaller than Willow Creek, with wide open spaces and neighbors who wave hello as they pass by. We bought a cozy little cottage surrounded by trees, where mornings are filled with birdsong and evenings glow golden under the setting sun. It's peaceful here, a stark contrast to the tension that once defined my life. Slowly, I've started to rebuild, piece by piece. One of the biggest changes has been my work with advocacy groups. After leaving Willow Creek, I threw myself into helping families navigate conflicts with HOAs and other bureaucratic systems. There's something powerful about turning pain into purpose, about using your story to make someone else's burden a little lighter. Through these efforts, I've met incredible people who refuse to let injustice go unchallenged. Together, we push for reforms, educate communities, and remind everyone that rules exist to serve us, not the other way around. Back in Willow Creek, life has improved dramatically. The new HOA board has done wonders, creating policies that prioritize safety, flexibility, and compassion. Emergency guidelines are now clear and straightforward, ensuring nothing like what happened to David could ever happen again. Neighbors gather more often, hosting barbecues, holiday parties, and movie nights under the stars. The fear that once gripped the community has lifted, replaced by a sense of belonging and trust. Sometimes, I drive back to visit old friends or attend events. Walking through the streets brings mixed emotions, sadness for what was lost, pride for how far we've come, and gratitude for the strength we found in each other. One evening, during a summer festival, I ran into Mr. Peterson. He smiled warmly and pulled me aside. "You know," he said, "what happened to your husband changed all of us. We won't forget it." His words stayed with me long after the festival ended. They reminded me that David's legacy wasn't just about the fight against Mrs. Hargrove. It was about the ripple effect of standing up for what's right. Because of him, Willow Creek became a better place. And because of him, I became stronger, braver, and more determined to live a life rooted in kindness and connection. Now, as I sit on the porch of our new home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, I think about David often. I imagine him smiling, proud of how far I've come and how much I've grown. Losing him taught me that life is fragile, unpredictable, and precious. It also taught me that even in the darkest moments, there's always a chance to start over, to find light where there was once only shadow. The scars remain, but they no longer define me. Instead, they remind me of the resilience of the human spirit, the power of community, and the importance of fighting for what truly matters. David may be gone, but his memory lives on, not just in my heart, but in the changes we made and the lives we touched. And for that, I am grateful.